right, hey, welcome to Let's Talk. This is John Kane with Regan DeLoggins, and we're going to do it up again here. Not so much res blues as much as it is blues everywhere with what's happening with coronavirus, with police abuse, and so many other things going on. We're gonna kind of get into it a little bit on trying not to lose sight with all the attention that has been given to Trump's Gestapo, goon squad, federal police, whatever you want to call it, being sent in or being threatened to be sent into cities or being sent into places like Portland. There's almost like there's been it's like it's been a distraction from the fact that we've been really trying to fight police abuse in general, which is more towards urban and city police and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, Regan, I think we almost got to refocus, and I'm not letting Trump's guys off the hook by any means. I'm just saying we better not forget what we're talking about here.
Yes, of course. I think that there has been, I mean, where to even start, to be honest. I feel like I have so many thoughts, so many opinions, and a lot of this is just, for me personally, so overwhelming at times. You know, what's happening in Portland. Apparently, federal agents are told to withdraw, but they're still showing up in stronger forces. Trump has announced that more federal troops will be sent to Detroit, to Cleveland, and to, where is the other city? Cleveland, Detroit, and
Chicago,
Milwaukee.
Chicago they talked about too. Yep.
Yeah, and Chicago. There was a very violent NYPD kidnapping that took place just 2 days ago of a trans woman. And it's just been, there's so much going on. So we have a lot to talk about today.
Yeah, you do. And I think part of the whole thing is again, I think it's absolutely wrong for what Trump is doing with this using federal law enforcement, which is that's a strange thing all by itself. It's a manufactured use of force, which came out of the post 9/11 era. Department of Homeland Security and all of this other stuff, the expansion of what they're calling border control agents that are sometimes miles and miles, hundreds of miles away from the border. It is turned into a real abuse, and Trump is specifically threatening cities that have either Democratic mayors or Democratic governors for those states. So there's no question about the politics involved in all of this stuff. But again, the part that's frustrating is these protests are not just towards, I don't want it to totally turn against federal law enforcement when it starts out with police abuse at the city level and sometimes at the state level, state police. And, it's the local police that have been, killing black people disproportionately and other people of color. It's been local police that have, that were the most aggressive against protesters. We saw that in New York. And as you just indicated, they did a snatch and grab that completely emulated what the federal police were doing in Portland. This whole idea of pulling up with an unmarked car, all of a sudden flocking a bunch of police so you can grab somebody, snatch them in a van, and take off. I mean, that's insane. I mean, that's the exact kind of thing that, under normal circumstances, you would have. Well, let me take it back. If there was a Democrat in office, Fox News would have been blasting. I saw, a side-by-side with the way Fox News responded to police, federal authorities going in with what the Bundys were pulling off with, both federal lands, in the Southwest and up in the Northwest. I mean, it's crazy when you see the hypocrisy that plays out in this thing. But again, I don't want to lose focus. Most of the abuse that we're talking about is happening at the hands of city police, and that abuse can be someplace like here and locally here to Buffalo, the city police, where again disproportionate numbers of black people are arrested and detained, questioned, beaten, and killed. in every urban population across the United States. The federal agencies here, or the federal police, are a bit of a distraction to it all. It's clearly an abuse of power on Trump's side, but that's where this issue becomes politicized. It doesn't, and it shouldn't distract us from going after and addressing the police abuse in general.
Absolutely. I think, there's been a lot of movement. There's been a lot of posters. There's been a lot of propaganda being created that says, like, no feds in then whatever city, no feds in Portland, no feds in NYC, no feds in, and I agree with you. I think that I am fearful that this is becoming a distraction from the fact that, like, we're still calling for and organizing for the complete abolition of police, of city police, of the NYPD. So I just don't want there to be a loss of sight in the fact that, it's the NYPD, it's the city-based police that cause so much harm. It's the NYPD that murdered Eric Garner. It wasn't a federal troop person, though. So I think that, I agree. I'm fearful that there will be a loss of sight. In the same way that I expressed last week that it concerns me that there are these solidarity calls for Portland, and I want to make sure that there isn't an erasure, that this is still for Black liberation and organized by Black liberators. And so even the protests happening in Portland, though the conversation is becoming, oh, look at the feds, look at what the feds are doing, like, this is still in reaction to Black lives.
Yeah, even the Portland mayor, even the Portland mayor getting maced or whatever happened to him, pepper sprayed or whatever else. I mean, he wasn't stepping up again for police reform necessarily. He was stepping up against these federal police. And look, what we're talking about here, whether it's complete abolition or defunding police, at very least, we're talking about the behavior of police, and whether they're federal police or whether they're city police, whether we're talking about chokeholds. And I haven't heard anybody talk about this, and I've said it multiple times, and I'll say it again. There is no reason for a police officer to strike any human being around the head or face. There's no reason for them to strike him in the head, the face. There's no reason for busted eye sockets, loss of teeth, busted lips, scars across the face, skulls being cracked open, and there's no reason for choking. Police are not supposed to be inflicting punishment. That's not their job. And this is, as much as people are going to debate chokeholds and what is a legal chokehold and an illegal chokehold, nobody is coming flat out across the board saying, look, there should be no contact with somebody's head, face, or neck. I mean, if you're going to grab somebody and put them in handcuffs, that's one thing. But the idea of beating somebody, even corporally, even beating the body is insane. But certainly there should be, anytime somebody has damage to their head, face, or neck, there should be, somebody should pay the price for that. And not just the recipient of those injuries. And this isn't a conversation. Look, and it's great for this to get politicized, right, between right and left. But the Democratic mayors and governors aren't stepping up against their police forces using this kind of physical abuse, abusive force. Absolutely. I mean, actually, I have. So let's talk about what happened on Tuesday. I guess what's today? Today's Thursday, so I guess this was Tuesday night. Right. So Tuesday night, there was a peaceful protest in Kips Bay. And a resident of Kips Bay was recording the peaceful march that was happening and caught the confrontation on camera, in which you see a young woman skateboarding down the street, and she skateboards past a minivan. It's like, like a tannish color. And suddenly the doors burst open and a number of plainclothes cops grab her and begin to shove her inside of the van. And as people approach to see what's going on, because this looks and is a kidnapping, the cops on bikes come out of nowhere and start body slamming people. A number of these plainclothes cops come and body slam people to get
this woman in the car. This woman, her name is Nikki Stone. She is 18 years old, and she is a trans woman that was apparently wanted for spray painting lenses of 6 police cameras during the occupation of the City Hall Park at the end of June into early July. Now, what I think is really important about all of these things, first, a trans woman was aggressively and violently pulled into an unmarked car. Second, we were told by the police commissioner that plainclothes cops were being disbanded. And third, she was participating in a peaceful protest and was removed off the street violently. So there's a number of problems here. I think it's incredible that this was caught on camera.
Yeah.
Like, I think it truly is incredible. I've watched the video multiple times, and it is terrifying to me as a person who participates in a lot of, direct action. And it's terrifying to see that that a trans woman would be treated with such incredible aggression from the police. And she is a white woman. Nonetheless, she is a target. She's targeted as she's skateboarding down the street.
Well, and one thing I want to address is there's all this talk of destruction of federal property, which is what they were saying in Portland, and the accusation was that she had destroyed surveillance cameras. Now, there's a big difference between spray painting a lens, and most of the destruction that they're talking about in Portland was graffiti, and it's listed. It's graffiti. So what they're calling destruction is pretty benign stuff. I mean, and whether this this woman actually spray painted these cameras or not, look, she could have been given a ticket, an appearance ticket. She didn't need to be violently assaulted and dragged into a van and dragged away. This is something that even if she had done this, to the extent that this was punishable by law, it's probably only a misdemeanor. It's like graffiti. She's having to spray paint over a lens. I mean, if that's what she even did. But the whole idea that they would create, such a strategy to grab one individual, because this had to be planned, right? I mean, the way it was orchestrated, the way you saw it play out with the bike cops using their bikes for shields and that kind of stuff, and all the physical altercations that took place, it seemed orchestrated, almost too much for it to be such a minor offense.
Yeah, I mean, she was after she was released, she received a summons. She was issued an order to appear in court to face charges of vandalism and criminal mischief.
There you go. Both
of which are not federal charges. There is no reason that an unmarked minivan with multiple plainclothes cops would arrest someone so violently. They didn't even arrest her; they kidnapped her.
Well, and
they pulled her into the car.
And then Bill de Blasio said, well, that arrest never should have been effectuated in that manner. Well, maybe she didn't even need to be, arrested, period. She could have just been issued they literally could have approached her and issued her a summons on the spot, a ticket, an appearance ticket. I mean, they literally could have done that. But instead, it's this over-the-top aggression, which is, again, to refocus, is the whole purpose of all of these protests. Look, in a worst case scenario, somebody's killed like George Floyd. That's the worst case scenario. But you cannot diminish the practice of this kind of snatch and grab kind of thing, because I don't know. I mean, do the New York police have a protocol for this, and what's appropriate, and what's not? I mean, the mayor's saying that it shouldn't have been effectuated in this manner, but that's look, that's like damage control. I don't know that is that effective. And at some point, when you look at all of the aggression that played out, especially in New York, because there was a lot of video of people getting knocked on their cans, present company not excluded. There's been no comment. I mean, so this, because it became very public and it's on the heels of condemning what the federal police were doing in Portland, it gets this kind of response. But it's kind of like a nothing burger. I mean, it doesn't really change anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Something that I learned after this happened, I started researching a little bit more about what happened to plainclothes cops being disbanded, because that was something that was said publicly and apparently disbanded immediately. And what I have found was that plainclothes cops weren't really disbanded. What happened is that they were moved into different groups, different squads, and they can remain plainclothes. So this squad that participated in the kidnapping of Nikki Stone are part of a squad that's known as the Warrant Squad. And they carry out warrants, including the one for Nikki's arrest. And they're actually incredibly common in NYC because they're similar to what is called no-knock warrants, which is the same warrant that ended with the murder of Breonna Taylor. And Warrant Squad arrests are used usually in high-risk arrest situations where there is a need for discretion, because there's a need for because there's an intention or there is an assumption that there will be a likely evasion of the arrest.
Or a high level of violence, a high likelihood of violence.
Exactly. Exactly. So warrant squads are actually pretty common in New York City. We see them working with ICE often in neighborhoods, black and brown neighborhoods. So to me, I think it's incredibly important that people understand in New York City that plainclothes cops were not disbanded. They were moved into different groups, into different squads, into different projects, and they can remain plainclothes, which is, for me, and I think for a lot of people, terrifying, but also the reality of what it looks like when movements are co-opted. When we call for the abolition of police and what the intention of the city, of the state, of the federal government is, they're not actually going to heed our calls. In fact, they're going to turn around and manipulate situations like this one, where you hear public proclamations of a disbanding of plainclothes cops, but they're just resituated and moved around. Just like many cops who have murdered people of color are not fired, but moved to different precincts, moved to different cities. This is an intention to avoid accountability.
Right.
I think for me, it's the arrest was the kidnapping. This was not an arrest. This was a kidnapping. The kidnapping was horrifying. And the realization that there are still plainclothes cops on every corner here in occupied New York City is terrifying.
Well, and there's the whole issue about properly identifying somebody and that kind of thing. It is concerning on a bunch of different levels. The idea that somebody can be grabbed without necessarily a positive ID and dragged into a car, and who knows when and where you see that person again. I mean, it is concerning. Look, the other thing, when you were speaking, one of the things that came to mind is we had our own circumstances take place here, even on the Cattaraugus territory of Seneca territory. And this is going back a few years, and this was, again, federal agents, the ATF, they came onto our territory with masks on, literally looking like they were going to rob a place, handguns, and took some Native people to the ground with guns to their head within line of sight of our playground. And they said, well, when asked why when they were masked, they said, well, they're undercover agents. So masked, armed assailants come onto a Native territory, grab people and put guns to their heads and hold them to the ground over cigarettes. Mm-hmm. Again, this is kind of a little bit of Eric Garner stuff going on, but the idea, the assumption is that somehow we were going to have a shootout with them, and they had to have this level of aggression with plainclothes cops, not just plainclothes, but masks. These guys were literally wearing ski masks. They weren't wearing. There was nothing about them that looked like they were police officers, and that's what we experienced.
It's incredible. It's incredible that they're. I was reading the reaction specifically to this arrest in reference to Nikki Stone. I was reading the reactions by certain by certain people in politics. And Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who represents the Bronx borough, had tweeted that, quote, "Our civil liberties are on brink. This is not a drill," end quote. And for me, I was like, oh, wow, you're late. You're late. This has been an issue in the same way that New York City Congressman Gerald Nadler said that there is no excuse for snatching women off the street and throwing them in unmarked vans. And for me, it was stressful to read these people reacting, saying, "Oh, this is incredibly disturbing. We need an immediate explanation for this use of force. This is a civil, our civil liberties are being questioned and tested." And it frustrates me that these kinds of comments are not being made when Black and brown people are being arrested,
absolutely,
being murdered.
I just saw another video of the NYPD shooting a dog, and the public outcry. I mean, right there, the amount of people who were screaming at these cops for shooting a dog. No, look, don't get me wrong; it's wrong for them to shot the dog, but there was clearly more concern expressed over this dog being shot than some of the violence that we've seen against human beings, and again, in particular, people of color, and even the protests, the stuff that, not just what you went through, but some of the violent clashes where these cops were knocking people on just hauling up. I mean, I saw this one young woman who was pushed so hard she smashed her head against the concrete and had seizures on the way to the hospital.
Yes.
Not even Alexandria Cortez was out there making noise about that in the way that should have been. And so none of these guys, Democrats or Republicans, have adequately addressed the over-the-top violence. And in many ways, you can almost see an attempt to justify it. You can hear these politicians trying to justify why such aggression is being used. And I'm not saying they're all doing it, but some of the voices you're hearing out there saying, well, it's about trying to keep peace and order. No, this is about intimidation. This is about, and here's what you see playing out with police officers. There is such a sense of arrogance and entitlement that a police officer has, that if somebody doesn't obey a command, whether they have the right to issue that command or not. I mean, I think about Sandra Bland. I mean, the reason she was so violently assaulted and then arrested and put in jail, where she later ends up dead, was because the police officer told her to put her cigarette out. He had no reason to tell her to put her cigarette. She was in her own car. I mean, and this is in Texas. And trust me, in Texas, they don't tell you can't smoke in your own car. Maybe there's some states that are thinking about doing that, but not in Texas. But he was outraged that she would not follow his instructions. And this is what we see playing out time and time again. It's why is Elijah McClain? What's his first name? McClain, the one who
Elijah.
They pumped him full of ketamine and killed him. I mean, they're just asking for unreasonable. They're putting out unreasonable commands, and over and over and over again. And if you don't follow those commands, there's an anger that ensues. There's an outrage that these cops have, and so they clearly don't have the temperament for doing their job. I mean, and they, this whole idea of, the idea that they're supposed to be peacekeepers or whatever else. No, they view themselves as authoritarian figures. And keep in mind, they don't have any authority. Their whole, to serve and protect. That's what they're supposed to be, in the service of people. And that's why when folks like yourselves and so many other people in so many other cities are saying, no, we've got to rethink this whole police thing. It isn't working. And then to listen to Bill Barr get up there in front of Congress and literally say that he doesn't believe systemic racism is a problem within police departments. Are you freaking kidding me?
Oh, that's just so. That's just ridiculous. I mean, that's incredible. That's incredible. Yeah. I can't even. I think that I just want people to understand, or maybe to consider educating themselves. You know, I obviously don't support the police. I think they should be abolished completely. They are part of systemic racism. They participate in violence against our communities. They were created specifically to protect property, not people. And that's just like historic fact. You could, Google it. It's out there. You can't avoid it. So for me, I don't understand how there isn't even more of an uproar. Yeah. How there isn't even more dissent, especially from politicians, because people have been in the streets. We've always been in the streets, but all of these quote unquote leftist politicians, especially these democratic socialists, they're still politicians.
Yeah.
And in the same way that the mayor of Portland, he got pepper sprayed, the most performative allyship I've ever seen. Like, even though he participated, was the police commissioner, participated in the continued attacks against his city, and it wasn't until the feds showed up that he was like, oh, this is a problem. I just cannot and do not understand. Also, what is the point of a tweet? Oh, this is so horrible. I'm so concerned. If you really thought it was so horrible and you were so concerned, then I expect to see you in the streets, just like everyone else is. But that's not the reality. So all of these tweets and all of these, all these posts calling for, accountability from the cops, especially from politicians, is just such a farce. Yeah. And for me, it's the most frustrating part of this. Reading people react to Nikki Stone's violent kidnapping versus people showing up for her jail support so that when she was released, there was community. Where were the politicians there? Were they there to greet her? No, they weren't. The community was there to greet her.
Right. Well, and that's part of the thing that concerns me is there's such a connection between police and white privilege. And you hear it all the time when you hear some white person say, well, if you had nothing to, if you had nothing to hide, then you would allow them to search your car. If you had nothing to hide, you'd fully cooperate. And all over and over again, you hear this kind of thing. And you also hear and see white people who are trying to empower themselves almost as if they themselves possess this, this unchecked power that police have. You see it not only in what, with George Zimmerman in Trayvon Martin situation, but you see it over and over again where white people are trying to enforce law that they have no knowledge of. And so this is when you ask that question, why is it's still acceptable? Because they're just like Trump still has 30% of the U.S. population supporting him. That's a lot of people. And so when you look at how many people will sit there in spite of their claim to cling to their guns to prevent tyranny, they're actually participating in the tyranny because they're not holding the police to account. They're actually they're high-fiving each other. They're passing along their white privilege, white power symbols, and that kind of stuff. I mean, look, there is a real problem in the United States, and it is a racism problem that is really, really percolating in such a way. And I'm not saying that all white people are racist. I'm not saying that. I will say they all benefit from systemic racism, but the reality is you have a large segment including in a blue state like New York or a blue city like New York. You have a lot of people who are just so enamored with with police that they think they think they should have this kind of unchecked power.
Oh, John, when will it change? When will it end?
Well, change is slow. There's no question about it. Look, hey, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we're gonna take a break. But when I come back, I'm really concerned, and I mentioned this to you the other day. I'm really concerned about what's gonna play out over the next couple of months with evictions. Whether whether the federal government sends out a bunch of checks or not, there's still a lot of stuff that is coming to a head in terms of economics, in terms of housing and all that other stuff. So let's give that a bit of a chat when we come back after this break. All right. Hey, thanks for coming back. Hey, before we get back into it, a couple of things. I want to remind people that we are WBAI. We are listener-supported radio, and we need your support, even in times of crisis, even in a pandemic. We are still listener-supported radio, so we need your help. We need you to go to the pledge lines, 516-620-3602. Make a pledge of any size. Hopefully, you'll do it in the name of this show. So we kind of send a message that you support this program, you support the conversations or the perspective. Even if you don't agree with the perspective, you just want to hear that perspective. So if you go to the pledge line, again, 516-620-3602, become a BAI buddy. Do that in the name of Let's Talk with John and Regan. You could go online. You can go to www.give2wbai.org. That's GIVE, the number 2, WBAI.org. And you can follow the prompts to make a one-time donation or become a BAI buddy, or even do a donation via text. We need your support. This is how the radio station is funded. And for me, the more support you show for this show, you secure our time slot. You secure us against preemptions. You do all that stuff when you support this program in this time slot. So again, please do go to the pledge line and make a donation. The other thing I want to mention a couple of things. I just Jake, my partner here, and we just released a new video yesterday, and it's called The 5 Policies. And for those of you who've never heard of the 5 U.S. policies against Native people, or for, to, I guess it's against as far as I'm concerned. Those policies are extermination, removal, assimilation, termination, and self-determination. I do a video. It's about a 15, 16, maybe 17-minute video. Shows some interesting footage, historical footage about the attempt to assimilate our people and to wield influence over our people. But then I get into describing what those 5 policies are, that they are not necessarily sequential. One policy didn't stop, and a new one started. Many of them overlap. So it's a good place to start to understand a little bit, and to whether it's the next step in your educational journey, or maybe your first step to say, oh, that's what they did. Well, there you go. You can go to my YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV, and look for our latest video, which is the 5 policies. Take a look at that. While I'm at it, I might as well tell people, look, check out our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. You can find the links to our podcast, to our videos, to other information associated with what we do here, and it's a good place if you want to take the first step towards finding out how to support the show, how all of the things that we do here. So again, that's letstalknative.com. I will say I had a terrific show on Tuesday on my Let's Talk Native program, where I had Janine Yazzie, who I met right there in New York. We did a Left Forum event together about a decade ago, and it was really covering, taking a new look, because the attention towards Navajo territory has kind of waned a little bit. So Janine joined me for a full hour, and we went through it all. And we also took our shots at not only how the pandemic came to Navajo territory through evangelicals and church and congregants and that kind of stuff, but the kind of a punch to the gut, as Janine calls it, when the Billy Graham motorhome shows up because they're going to offer evangelical prayer, which is kind of how they got there in the first place, and the fact that Navajo leadership seemed to embrace this this photo op and that kind of stuff. So we went after it all. So check that out. That would be the latest podcast that we have up. If you want to find the podcasts, which include this show and my Let's Talk Native show, you just search Let's Talk Native with John Kane podcast. I have the Let's Talk shows on with the Let's Talk Native shows in that on that podcast channel, and it's on all your favorite podcast platforms. So you can find those shows there. And of course, we put the shows up on YouTube as well, so you can take a look at them there. All right. I wanted to get into a little bit. I wanted to at least take a look and try to wrap my head around what might be coming down the pike with evictions in New York City. There was all this talk about, oh, we're going to suspend evictions and we're not going to allow people to be evicted during this pandemic. Well, you may have slowed down some of the evictions for 3 or 4 months, but it doesn't mean the rents didn't still accumulate. There are people that are in dire straits in terms of covering the rents because of everything that's transpired with this with this pandemic, and it's going to start hitting. I mean, I saw one news article. In fact, Jake turned me on to a news article that talked about U.S. may be #1 in homelessness, in spite of city or countries like India, because of what's coming down the pike right now.
Yeah. Well, there was an eviction moratorium that was put into place. It was in late March. Governor Cuomo put in an executive order 202.8, which issued a sweeping 90-day moratorium on all evictions, meaning that from that point on, for 90 days, you couldn't be evicted if you didn't have the ability to pay rent. However, then on top of that, there was an additional 60 days that was added beginning June 20th, 2020, in order to, and that's the 202.28 executive order. And so there was this intention to not have people evicted during COVID, considering that there were so many people that lost their jobs or that were folks on unemployment. But we're already seeing multiple residential eviction cases being brought up in housing courts by landlords in Queens and in Brooklyn specifically since the initial moratorium, the call for the moratorium of eviction. So it's all changing now very quickly, which means that there's about 19 million to 28 million renter households that are facing eviction by the end of September.
Wow. What great timing. Head into fall, head into the colder months. And look, this is why the lack of forethought. When you put a moratorium on evictions, that sounds great, but it doesn't stop the rent from accumulating. The reality is, I don't know what language was ever introduced, but who's going to have the ability to pay if they couldn't pay during that 90 days and then the subsequent 60 days? How are they going to pay for all that back rent? I mean, there's a lot of reasons that people could be evicted here going forward. And look, here's the other part of the problem. I realize that some landlords live off that money too, so their income got there was nobody throwing money at securing housing. Just telling somebody they couldn't evict them doesn't solve the problem. And of course, I understand the slumlord trade that exists in many urban environments, especially in New York City. So I'm not defending all landlords, but the whole situation just wasn't thought through properly.
Yeah, I mean, you had the CARES Act, which was enacted on March 27th, but expired on July 28th, which was an intention to freeze the flood of filings that were going to be coming in, and was specifically about federal eviction moratoriums. So that was you only had like a couple of months there, but with it expiring on July 28th, that also means that landlords couldn't apply for CARES Act support, which is why coming in September, we're going to have like a number of cases and filings for people to be evicted. And on June 30th, there was a new state law that was put in by Governor Cuomo that's called the New York Tenant Safe Harbor Act, which when I read what was available online about this, it is meant to be it prohibits certain evictions during the COVID emergency, certain evictions, but I have yet to find really good wording as to what determines certainty. What, so, and of course you have to remember that New York City is massive. Evictions, eviction notices, all of these, they take months. It costs money. There are, it is a strenuous process, and tenants have a lot of rights, not just squatters' rights, but just a general amount of rights. So it usually takes quite a bit of time to get someone actually evicted.
Right.
And I'm putting that in quotes. However, this is a totally unwarranted time. It's a crisis.
Yeah.
Which means that the way that landlord eviction is going to take place is going to be different. It's not going to be like it.
The rules are going to change, and of course, what exacerbates this to some extent is there is an event that absolutely has caused people to get behind in rent that goes beyond what people struggle with on a normal basis. So now you've got people who may be 3-4 months behind in rent that wouldn't have been under normal circumstances. So the conditions have changed, the rules are likely going to change, and what's going to end up happening in the interest of the economy, I guarantee you're going to see some of those renters' rights diminish.
Absolutely. And, this is also in the same time where the $600 per week pandemic unemployment benefit expires.
Right.
So that is now being, and then people are being expected to go back to work. So a lot of people were fired, a lot of people were furloughed, laid off because other places couldn't continue to pay them. So now, and that coupled with the pandemic unemployment benefits being removed, we're talking about a lot of people in financial crisis. I mean, I applied for unemployment back in March when this started happening. I have yet to see a penny. Yeah. I have not received my $600 per week pandemic unemployment benefits on additional unemployment benefits. Luckily, I've been able to, keep my head above water and do the things that I need to do. But this is an unprecedented amount of lack of funds coming into many homes. People who have still not seen their unemployment benefits, people who are now, their unemployment benefits are expiring. But, we have 1.5 million people in New York State that are still collecting unemployment at this month. And more than 85,000 people who have applied at the week ending in July 25th. So there are people who still need access to unemployment benefits. And then there's now a fear that you'll be evicted because you can't pay rent.
Well, and make no mistake about it. There was a lot of money that came that was put up for the CARES Act. And the overwhelming majority of that went to corporations. I mean, the thing is, if you are sending the lion's share of that money to the people that will spend and keep some level of economy going, why do you still need to support the corporations who are, some of which are supposed to be the ones who are benefiting from the economy kept going by those by those stimulus checks? The amount of money that went, even the airline industry. When I looked at some of the monies that were flying into some of these industry sectors, it just seemed unreasonable. In the meantime, you have individuals who are going to suffer, and of course, the problem is the pandemic isn't over, and New York is ripe for a second wave. Yeah, the numbers all look good, that are being reported right now, but you start sending kids back to school.
It's inevitable.
Yeah. It is. It could get really, really ugly going forward. Not only are there hot zones in the hot spots in the South, but this really could light back up, and then where's everybody going to be? I am really, really concerned about what the next 4, 5, 6 months are going to look like.
I think that also it's really important to understand that even though there was a moratorium, Cuomo's original moratorium on rent, there was still a little under 1,000 eviction petitions that were filed in housing court.
Right.
So even during the moratorium, people were being penalized for not paying rent, or penalized for not being able to pay the full amount of rent. So the idea of a moratorium being like a safe space is not the reality, because in the end, housing courts weren't closed.
Yeah, right.
So you could still file eviction petitions.
Yeah.
Which means that then
you just weren't going to get hauled out of the building. The process, the bureaucracy was still in place.
Absolutely. So people were and are still expected to have paid rent during the moratorium. most landlords didn't apply or couldn't apply to CARES Act relief because there were such stringent and requirements and barriers assessing people to that application. So there was a rent relief program, and then that doesn't even include personal rent relief, which also had stringent requirements and barriers to accessing that application. So both sides had no access. And, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not here for landlords. I believe, like, I'm all about a landlord-free NYC, if you ask me. But it's important to talk about there wasn't accessibility for anyone to receive relief in any way, shape, or form.
Absolutely opportunistic landlords who are probably seeing the opportunity here to perhaps change their rent structures to accelerate gentrification. There are clearly landlords who may see opportunity, and that may be the reason not to apply for any of the CARES Act, whatever was available to them. Because I think there probably are some landlords who, frankly, would love to get rid of their current tenants to do, to see their property values escalate and that kind of thing. So I think there are definitely landlords who would take advantage of the circumstance.
And there were landlords that applied for CARES Act and also still claimed rent from their tenant.
Yeah.
So I understand that in the time of crisis, a lot of things were put into place haphazardly because there was crisis. But housing issues have been a problem, especially here in New York City, for forever. Gentrification raises prices to an ungodly amount of money, pushing Black and brown families further and further and further out. And gentrification also is hand in hand with policing. We can't forget that gentrified neighborhoods or neighborhoods that are becoming more gentrified are heavily policed to remove Black and brown bodies to keep crime rates low. And I'm putting that all in quotes. Please know I'm being that's not the reality. But the point here is that there's a larger problem. A rent crisis and housing crisis is also synonymous to more and more violent policing in neighborhoods.
Yeah, you can't pay your rent if you get arrested. If you get locked up even short term, it's real easy to find yourself behind the 8 ball on this stuff. So you're right. The connection between again the aggressive policing of Black neighborhoods does aid in the gentrification process, and I don't think that it's just a coincidence. I think there's a strategy there. I don't think it's just a correlation. I think there is some causation there. So
absolutely, and I will say that there is a housing march and sleep out for an eviction-free NYC that is happening this Saturday on August 1st. At 6 p.m. on 70th Street and Myrtle in Glendale, Queens, and specifically in relation to housing justice as racial justice. And I'm not supposed to tell people to go, but guess what?
It's not a call to action. It's just information we're sharing. To be clear,
a firmly worded email that I'll quickly delete. But I do remind people that there are ways to get involved in terms of housing justice here in New York City because it is all connected.
And I gotta bring up one more thing before we go. We're running out of time, but
of course,
the whole idea that you have Republicans in particular trying to push through liability protection against companies who may have created circumstances and or maintaining circumstances that put people at risk, specifically to coronavirus. And look, whether they're talking about meat packing plants, whether we're talking about other work environments, there are so many places that the work conditions were unacceptable in the first place. But to now take a significant amount of money, which again, the Republicans are trying to do as little as possible to help out the average person, but again, they want to make sure they put in plenty of protection for their corporate interests, and the idea of trying to put together this liability protection, I think it's almost criminal. I mean, it's amazing to me. Liability laws are really difficult for people to pursue any kind of relief from when it comes against these big corporations anyway. And now you want to add another layer of protection because you don't want somebody being held liable for an unsafe work condition just because of COVID. I mean, that's pretty ruthless as far as I'm concerned.
This is why I can't wait for the fall of capitalism, the end of colonization, and for the rematriation of indigenous lands, and for Black liberation, y'all. Like, let's get going.
Well,
And you won't have to wait that long too.
we're on our way. We're definitely on our way. And and look, as a Native person, I always say what my fight is not just for constitutional rights, and it's kind of where, in many ways, there's a separation between what the Native agenda is versus some of the other people who are oppressed. And I'm not denying the oppression, but for us, we want a free and independent existence. We're trying to return ourselves to a place where we control our destinies a little bit more, and not just that we have higher levels of government protection. We want less government involvement, and that fits in with fall of capitalism and all of that stuff. So again, I want to remind people, you can check out our podcasts for Let's Talk Native and for Let's Talk. You can just search. You can ask Alexa to search for Let's Talk Native with John Kane podcast, and you can go through the list. You can go online. You can do it. I do again advise people to check out my show from Tuesday with Janine Yazzie. And by all means, check out my YouTube channel and look at the 5 policies video that we just posted up. Don't just look at it. I want you to view it. I want you to share it. I want you to offer. I want you to have the conversation that takes it farther. Research some of the things that we put out there. I'm not trying to be the last word on anything. Sometimes I may be the first word, but sometimes I'm just part of the conversation in the middle. And that's what we do here. That's what Regan and I do here with Let's Talk. So. Hey, we'll see you next week, and I'll be back with Let's Talk Native on Saturday night. We'll see you then. Yahweh.